Okay? All right, man, just take a breath. I'm asking you one more time. Where you headed from here?
Oh, that's it. I was filling up, that's all. I told you that already.
I heard you. I just need to make sure everything checks out. License is still in your wallet?
Yeah, it's right here. Look, I haven't done anything.
I'm not saying you did. My job's to verify and then you're on your way. Okay?
That afternoon, Marcus Thorne stood beside his black SUV at a Shell gas station on the southern edge of Atlanta. The July sun beat down on the scorching pavement, the heat rising from the asphalt, creating a subtle, almost illusory vibration in the air. The station was deserted, the only sounds being the steady hum of the pumps and the faint smell of gasoline on the breeze. Thorne wasn't in a hurry. He was used to waiting. A tall, well-dressed 53-year-old man in a dark blue polo shirt and khaki pants was pumping gas on his way to an important meeting. Nothing unusual. Nothing noteworthy. Then a harsh voice shattered the silence. "Get out of the car. Right now." Marcus Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't drop the pump. Nor did he back away. He simply slowly turned his head, squinting at the man who had yelled at him, the sunlight illuminating his stern face. A testament to nearly 3 decades of work most people never saw. Before him stood a young officer, his hand resting on his holster, his fingers slightly curled as if waiting for an excuse. "Excuse me," Thorne asked, his voice low, calm, and so composed that it could dampen even the most tense interrogations. "I said get out of the car," the officer repeated, his voice higher, sharper, as if volume alone could suffice for reason. He stood with his legs apart, chin raised, displaying the youthful authority often seen in those new to uniform and untouched by consequences. Thorne glanced at the running pump, then back at the officer. "I'm pumping gas," he said slowly. "I paid. I'm in my place. What's the matter?" "Officer." The officer took another step, closing the distance between them. "You're acting suspiciously," he said. "We received a call." In just a few brief sentences, an ordinary afternoon at the gas station turned into a confrontation. And what neither of the 2 men at pump number 6 realized was that in less than 20 minutes, this moment would end a young police officer's career and expose a truth America had heard all too many times. The officer's name was Kyle Vance, 24, fresh out of college less than 6 months ago, and still carrying the reckless confidence of someone who had never been reprimanded for a wrong decision. His hair was cut too short on the sides, his uniform tailored to accentuate his still-developing biceps. Kyle Vance stood before Marcus Thorne as if the entire gas station were his personal stage. His right hand rested on his holster, not so much to draw it, but to signal to the man opposite him which side held the upper hand. "We received a call from inside," Vance said, his voice cold. "The staff said you've been standing here too long, staring at the store. There's evidence of loitering." Marcus Thorne frowned slightly. He glanced down at the gas pump meter and then back at the officer. "I've been here for less than 4 minutes," he replied, his voice even and not rising. "This is a large tank. It takes time. I was checking my email while I waited." Vance smirked faintly, a smile devoid of any humor. "Sounds like an excuse." The atmosphere around pump number 6 began to shift. Those pumping gas at the nearby pumps slowed down. A woman at pump number 4 stopped, her tank cap still open. A delivery driver glanced through his half-down window. "Show your papers," Vance said. This time, not a request. It was an order. Marcus Thorne exhaled slowly, as if reminding himself to remain calm. "Officer," he said, "unless you have legitimate grounds to believe I have committed or am committing a crime, I am not obligated to show my papers while conducting a normal transaction." Kyle Vance's eyes darkened. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected. In 6 months of patrolling, most people would have been flustered, apologized, and hastily pulled out their wallets to smooth things over. But this man was different. He stood there, straight-backed, composed, as if the power Kyle Vance was trying to project was completely ineffective. Vance took another step forward, his voice sharp. "I decide what constitutes legal grounds," he said. "And right now, my grounds are that you are disobeying orders. Do you want to make this an obstruction of justice?" At that moment, the tension had crossed the line of a routine inspection. This was no longer a matter of paperwork. This was a battle of egos. And Kyle Vance had decided he could not back down. Kyle Vance didn't see a middle-aged man running late for work. Nor did he see a government official with the demeanor of someone accustomed to making decisions in closed offices. What Vance saw, from the moment he stepped out of his patrol car, was an image already framed in his mind for a long time. A tall, large black man, driving an expensive SUV, standing alone at a gas station in an area Vance believed not his place. This gas station was on the edge of a rapidly changing residential area. New apartment buildings sprang up alongside rows of old shops, where demographic change was happening faster than people could adapt. In places like this, suspicion often precedes reason, and for people like Kyle Vance, that suspicion easily takes on the guise of professionalism. "You've been standing here for 10 minutes, Vance snapped, without even looking at his watch. "Look around. Look inside the shop. It doesn't look right." Marcus Thorne turned his head to look back at the display on the pump. The numbers were still running. He didn't raise his voice. Nor did he seem irritated. "I haven't been standing here for 10 minutes, he said. "And it's not a crime for me to look around while waiting for gas. If you think I'm about to break the law, you need to specify what crime." That statement, though perfectly reasonable, acted as a spark. To Vance, this wasn't a citizen explaining himself. This was a man challenging his authority right to his face. And in Kyle Vance's world, authority was one-sided. It went from top to bottom, and anyone who didn't bow was seen as a threat. Vance stepped closer, close enough for Thorne to feel his ragged breath in the stifling heat. "You're acting suspiciously," Vance repeated, as if that statement alone was enough to legitimize everything. "And I don't need any more reasons." Marcus Thorne looked directly into the young officer's eyes. He had seen that look before, in places far beyond this gas station. It was the look of someone who had already decided on their story and was trying to force the world around them to conform to it. He knew how dangerous that feeling was, because once reason was replaced by prejudice, all rules became arbitrary. And in this moment, Thorne understood that this confrontation would not end with an apology or a nod. Kyle Vance stood there, his hand still on his gun holster, completely unaware that the man before him was no stranger to power or danger. Marcus Thorne wasn't the type to engage in petty arguments, nor was he easily intimidated by loud voices or aggressive postures. For nearly 30 years, he'd worked in windowless offices, facing people for whom a wrong decision could cost lives. Compared to his own experiences, a young officer trying to appear tough at this gas station was just a fleeting breeze. Marcus Thorne was the deputy superintendent for Atlanta at the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, DEA. He'd begun his career in the late 90s, when gang wars and drug trafficking were still openly fought on the streets. He'd worked undercover, commanded multi-agency operations, and confronted men willing to open fire for a single wrong glance. Thorne's power lay not in how big of a command he could issue, but in the fact that when he spoke, the entire system would move. But Kyle Vance didn't know that. And even if he did, at this moment, he probably wouldn't believe it. To Vance. His uniform was the only proof of his authority. Anyone who didn't react with fear was seen as deliberately defying him. You are disobeying a legitimate order, Vance said, his voice strained in the sweltering heat. This is the last time I'll say this. Marcus Thorne took a deep breath, keeping his arms at his sides. He knew all too well how situations like this could go awry with just a small movement. Officer, he said, his voice low and slow. I am conducting a legitimate transaction. If there are complaints from internal personnel, that's their problem. But if you have no concrete evidence, you are overstepping your authority. That statement wasn't a challenge. It was a warning. A warning delivered by someone who knew the law far better than the man standing before him. But Kyle Vance didn't hear the calmness or experience in that voice. All he heard was defiance. And in his mind, defiance meant immediate suppression. At that moment, as the pump continued its steady hum and the surrounding eyes began to follow, the contrast between real power and false power became clear. On one side was the man who understood the limits of the law. On the other was the man who believed he was the law. The atmosphere around pump number 6 grew thick. The Georgian heat seemed to press everyone closer together. And with it, the tension was building. Marcus Thorne noticed this acutely. He also noticed something far more dangerous. Kyle Vance's gaze had changed. It was no longer the initial suspicion. It was the look of someone who had decided he couldn't back down. Because backing down now would mean losing face. Thorne slowly pulled the pump nozzle from the gas tank and hung it back on the stand. The dry, metallic clang was loud enough to startle a few people nearby. He turned completely around, standing straight, his arms relaxed but still clearly visible to the officer. He was slightly taller than Vance, broad-shouldered, the posture of someone accustomed to controlling his surroundings without raising his voice. Listen carefully, Thorne said, his voice low. Not loud, but firm, carrying the weight of experience. I'm not obstructing you. I'm not threatening you. I'm doing what's legal. And if you continue to escalate this situation, you'll get yourself into far more trouble than you can imagine. Kyle Vance chuckled. A short, sharp laugh, completely devoid of humor. Is that a threat? He asked. Who do you think you are to speak to me like that? Marcus Thorne shook his head slightly. No, he replied. That's a warning. He knew he was walking a fine line. Saying too much would be seen as a challenge to Vance. Remaining silent wouldn't improve the situation either. But there are moments in life when silence means handing over complete control to someone undeserving of it. Check the license plates. Thorne continued, his voice even. Call your commander. This could end right here. Right now. And no one would regret it. Kyle Vance didn't look at the SUV. He didn't reach for his radio. He stared at Thorne. His teeth clenched. In his mind, everything had been simplified to a single choice: either subdue this man in front of the crowd, or accept that he had been wrong from the start. And for Kyle Vance, that wasn't a choice. He stepped closer, closing the distance one last time, his voice low and menacing. I don't need any checks, Vance said. I am the law here. In that moment, Marcus Thorne understood that his final warning had gone unheard. And when a man with a gun believes he is the law, what comes next is no longer a misunderstanding. It is disaster. Everything happened so fast. But for Marcus Thorne, every second felt like it was being stretched out in the stifling heat of the gas station. Kyle Vance didn't wait for another word. He lunged forward, his hand grabbing Thorne's left wrist and twisting it violently behind his back with a move he'd learned in academy. Rough and uncontrolled. "Turn around. Put your hands on the car," Vance yelled. His voice harsh. Loud enough for the phones held up around him to pick up clearly. "I'm not resisting," Thorne said instantly. His voice clear. Chillingly calm. He didn't pull his hand away. He didn't resist. He let his body stiffen, standing still like a rock. The way those who knew the law and guns knew it was the safest way to survive. Kyle Vance didn't stop. He thrust Thorne forward, pressing his chest against the sun-scorched SUV. A dry thump echoed as Thorne's body hit the metal. The woman at pump number 4 gasped in horror. The delivery driver had stepped out of the cabin. Phone aloft. "Don't resist," Vance continued to yell, though Thorne remained completely motionless. "I'm cooperating," Thorne said. His voice his face turned to the side, cheek pressed against the windshield. "You're using excessive force on someone who isn't resisting." But Kyle Vance couldn't hear him anymore. Adrenaline and anger had overwhelmed everything he'd been taught about self-control and situational awareness. He kicked Thorne hard in the ankle, forcing his legs apart more than necessary, then pulled out the handcuffs, yanking them forcefully behind his back. The metallic click of the handcuffs closing echoed coldly. Vance tightened them more than necessary. Each click of the lock a declaration that the situation had crossed all reasonable boundaries. Thorne winced slightly, but didn't cry out. He had suffered far more serious injuries before. What hurt him most wasn't his wrist, but the stark realization that just minutes before, it had been a normal afternoon, and now, in the middle of nowhere, he was handcuffed like a dangerous criminal. Not for any of his actions, but because a young man with a gun had decided that his authority had not to be questioned. Kyle Vance yanked Marcus Thorne away from the car, his handcuffs still tightly clasped behind his back. Thorne walked slowly but steadily, offering no resistance, though each step brought a dull ache to his wrists. Vance pushed him toward the patrol car as if escorting a dangerous criminal, his eyes darting around the gas station to check if anyone was watching. Many were watching, and even more so, they were recording everything. The show's over. Vance yelled at the onlookers, "Get out of the way or you'll get into trouble." But the threat had no effect. The phones were still raised. The cameras were still pointed at them. Marcus Thorne saw it out of the corner of his eye. He realized that every next action of Kyle Vance, however small, was automatically becoming evidence. Vance opened the rear door of the patrol car and shoved Thorne inside, roughly lowering his head to avoid hitting the doorframe, then forcefully pushing him into the cold, hard plastic seat. The door slammed shut with a heavy bang, cutting off the noise outside. Inside, the mingled smells of old sweat and disinfectant were so familiar that Thorne suddenly realized the bitter paradox. He had sat in the front of this car hundreds of times. He had never imagined he would be shoved into the back. Kyle Vance walked around to the driver's seat, adjusted his belt, straightened his collar, his gait somewhat ostentatious. In the rearview mirror, he saw Marcus Thorne's face, frighteningly calm. It made him uncomfortable. "You have the right to remain silent," Vance began, his voice monotonous like an empty ritual. "Whatever you say. You should read it carefully." Thorne interrupted, his voice low but clear, "Because you'll need to remember every word when you have a lawyer sitting next to you." "Shut up," Vance snapped, slamming his hand on the front door before starting the engine. He sped away from the gas station, the tires screeching on the hot pavement. He didn't notice that Thorne's SUV was unlocked, its door ajar, revealing a briefcase containing sensitive government documents. Nor did he notice that the gas pump had just shut off, leaving a scene full of careless mistakes. Those errors, one by one, were piling up, silently transforming an unwarranted stop into a professional nightmare that Kyle Vance still thought he had under control. The patrol car sped into the police station's sally port, the heavy metal doors sliding down behind them, swallowing the midday sun and leaving a cold, echoing, enclosed space. Kyle Vance shut off the engine, opened the tailgate, and yanked Marcus Thorne's arm, pulling him out as if completing a triumphant performance. Inside the office, the ringing of telephones mingled with the clicking of keyboards. Several officers looked up when they saw Vance leading the handcuffed man. At the reception desk, Lieutenant Frank Miller held a cup of cold coffee, his eyes fixed on a stack of files. "What's going on?" Miller asked without looking up. "Good catch," Vance said, his voice excited. "Suspicious suspect at the Shell gas station, refusing to show identification, claiming to be federal, detained for impersonation, obstruction, and resistance." Miller set down his coffee cup and finally looked up. His gaze settled on the man standing before him. He looked at the meticulously polished leather shoes, at the upright posture, even with his hands still cuffed. And then he looked at the face. A short but heavy silence fell over the reception area. Miller had been in the service for 30 years. He had seen all kinds of criminals, all kinds of eyes. The man before him didn't have the eyes of someone who had just been arrested. It was the eyes of someone accustomed to giving orders and taking responsibility. Impersonation, Miller repeated, slowly. "Yes, Lieutenant," Vance replied, still smiling. "Say you're DEA." Miller stepped away from the table, moving closer. "Sir," he said cautiously, "do you have identification?" "In my back pocket," Marcus Thorne replied, "next to the badge, the real badge." Miller reached into the back pocket of his khaki pants and pulled out a black leather wallet. He opened it. The gold metallic gleam of the DEA badge reflected under the fluorescent lights, clear and unmistakable. Beneath it was the identification card with the seal of the U.S. Department of Justice. The room fell silent. Miller closed his wallet very slowly, as if hoping this moment had never happened. Then he turned to Kyle Vance. His voice was low, but each word seemed to fall to the concrete floor. "Unclip him. Now." Kyle Vance froze, as if his brain had been disconnected from the rest of his body. The smile on his lips froze and then vanished completely when he saw the DEA badge in Lieutenant Miller's hand. The color drained from his face so quickly it looked almost unreal, leaving a pale, empty expression. Lieutenant Vance stammered. It could be fake. I've heard plenty of people say that." Miller spun around, his eyes now filled with suppressed anger. No longer caution. "Give me the keys," he growled. "The handcuff keys," Vance asked again, his voice trembling, seemingly still not grasping the gravity of what had just happened. "Unclip him," Miller yelled, his voice echoing through the reception room. "Now." Vance jumped, frantically searching his pockets. His hands trembled so much that he dropped the bunch of keys to the floor twice. The metallic clang against the concrete floor echoed jarringly in the silence of the surrounding officers. Finally, he managed to insert the key into the lock. A dry click sounded as the handcuff sprang open. Marsham Thorne reached forward, gently rubbing his wrist, which bore the deep red marks. He wasn't in a hurry. He said nothing, His calmness was more terrifying than any rage. He took the wallet from Miller and slipped it into his back pocket. "Lieutenant Miller." "Right," Thorne asked, his voice even and clear, echoing in the breathless room. "Yes." "Enzer, Agent Thorne," Miller replied, sweat beading on his forehead. I'm truly sorry about this." "This wasn't a misunderstanding," Thorne said, turning his gaze to Kyle Vance. "This was an unlawful arrest." Vance recoiled, his back touching the table behind him. His eyes darted back and forth between Miller and Thorne, as if searching for a non-existent escape. For the first time since stepping out of his patrol car at the gas station, Kyle Vance understood something simple, yet too late. He hadn't arrested a liar. He had arrested the very person the system was designed to protect. Marcus Thorne took a deep breath, feeling his heartbeat return to normal. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand any personal apologies. Instead, he did what those familiar with the system always do when they see it abused. He asked for proper procedure. "I need a phone." Thorne said, his voice calm but leaving no room for refusal, "I need to call my immediate superior." And then the federal prosecutor's office. Lieutenant Miller nodded repeatedly, hastily pushing the desk phone toward Thorne. The other officers in the room avoided his gaze. No one spoke. The atmosphere in the station had completely changed. The usual clamor gave way to the heavy feeling of a machine realizing it had just crushed a part of itself. Thorne picked up the receiver, dialing a long string of numbers entirely from memory. He waited 2 rings. "Elena." "It's me," he said, his voice as calm as if he were calling to reschedule a meeting. "I won't be able to attend the briefing. I'm at Station 4. I've just been illegally detained." He paused, listening to the other end of the line. Then he continued, "That's right. The Shell gas station. There are witnesses and cameras. You should bring your legal team and your communications officer. This isn't going to go away." He put the receiver down slowly. Then he turned to Lieutenant Miller. "You should call your chief," Thorne said, "and tell him to come here as soon as possible." Miller swallowed hard, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the phone. He knew exactly what was coming. Not an internal reprimand, not a report to be shelved. This was what every police department feared. Light. Kyle Vance slumped into a nearby chair, his head buried in his hands. The sounds around him were muffled. Every self-defense he had prepared vanished. For the first time, he was no longer in control of the narrative. And elsewhere in the city, videos from the gas station were beginning to spread, view by view, signaling that Kyle Vance's mistake was about to become more than just an internal matter. Everything happened so fast that no one had time to control it. Less than an hour later, the video from the gas station had surfaced on social media, posted by a woman standing at pump number 4 with the short caption, "Police arrest DEA boss by mistake just for pumping gas." Views skyrocketed by the minute, from a few thousand to hundreds of thousands, then surpassing 1 million before the afternoon ended. At the police station, the chief appeared with a face so tense it looked like he'd aged 10 years. Kyle Vance's body cam was immediately confiscated. His personal files were ordered to be searched thoroughly. Old, previously overlooked reports were pulled out of dusty drawers and stacked on the investigation table. The pattern was clear in cold, unexplained stops, threatening inspections, primarily targeting people of color, and no specific criminal charges followed. By the end of the day, it was no longer just a story about a gas station or a patrol shift. It was the story of an entire police department. Major news outlets jumped on board. Images of Kyle Vance, his youthful face but aggressive gaze at the scene. Appeared on evening news broadcasts nationwide. Questions began to be raised not only about him, but about those who had trained, supervised, and protected him from the consequences all this time. An internal investigation was announced. But everyone understood it was just a formality. The evidence was overwhelming. Video doesn't lie. Witnesses can't be silenced. And this time, everything was recorded from beginning to end. Kyle Vance was suspended that same week. The police union issued a statement distancing itself from the incident, emphasizing that his behavior does not represent the values of the force. That's how the system began to defend itself, when the storm of public opinion was too great to shield an individual. A few months later, a federal lawsuit was announced. Marcus Thorne didn't just sue for himself. He sued for unlawful arrest, for excessive use of force, and for a system that allowed it to happen. The city chose to settle. The final amount was $6.5 million, one of the largest settlements in state history for a single wrongful arrest. Kyle Vance was fired. His badge was revoked. His name was added to the national blacklist. His career ended as quickly as it had been built. All because of a single misstep made in the sweltering heat of a July afternoon. 6 months after that day, Marcus Thorne sat on the porch of his house as the Georgia heat finally subsided with the setting sun. In his hand was a glass of iced tea, the ice cubes clinking softly against the sides. He had officially retired from the DEA the previous week. 28 years of service, hundreds of cases, big and small, and a career that ended not on a podium, but at an ordinary gas station. The settlement was enough to ensure he would never have to worry about finances again. But Thorne still received his pension. And he did something else that few people knew about. He donated $2 million from the settlement to a legal aid fund for those who couldn't afford a lawyer, those who didn't have a gold badge in their back pocket to make others stop and listen. He thought a lot about that afternoon. He thought about how things could have been different in just a split second. If he had been younger, if he had reacted faster, if he had instinctively pulled his hand back when Kyle Vance lunged at him. In that moment, for a young, tense police officer, hand on gun and mind clouded with prejudice, one wrong move could lead to an irreversible explosion. And then, nobody cared who he was. He was just another name on the list of those shot by mistake. Thorne leaned back in his chair, watching the fireflies flicker in the garden. "The system protected me," he said slowly. His gaze lowered, but only because I was part of the system. He looked up, staring directly into the camera, breaking the invisible wall between the story and the viewer. If a man with 28 years of federal service, with authority over the entire United States, can still be targeted simply because of his skin color and an assumption, what protects your child? What protects your father? What protects you? He paused for a moment, letting the question hang in the air. "We're not telling these stories to make you hate the police," Thorne continued. "We're telling them because the police need to be better, because power without accountability always leads to tragedy." He set his teacup down, his voice softening but still heavy. "Watch videos like this. Don't scroll past. Witness them. Because the silence of good people is what fosters the worst mistakes. If you believe that truth is the first step to change, leave your thoughts below. Do you think police should be held more personally accountable for their actions? And if you've ever felt judged simply for entering a space that doesn't belong to you, what is your story? We read every comment. And if you believe that stories like these need to continue to be told, hit subscribe. There's still so much work to be done.